Can Baker Mayfield make magic again? That and more today on Showdown Coverage, brought to you by SharpFootballAnalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde. We have the Los Angeles Rams heading to the Green Bay as 7-point dogs. Baker Mayfield obviously had that great comeback last week, but I'm not so sure that we're going to get that same sort of game script this week. So the first player we'll talk about is Aaron Jones. He was priced at 11,200 and was questionable all week, limited in practice all week, but has no injury designation going into the game. This is going to be interesting because I feel like the field has already decided that they're in on AJ Dillon at 6,200, which is far too cheap for him. Aaron Jones played only 30% of the snaps last week, and we're not really sure exactly why. I mean, he was limited all week after, but I believe he finished out that game, so it's really difficult to say. How that workload's going to shape out going forward, and especially with Aaron Jones being the most expensive player of the slate by 400. It's tough to say whether or not you want to be in on him, but given that we might get an ownership dip just because of the uncertainty surrounding him, I think it's a good way to play Aaron Jones. In fact, they're 7-point home favorite, so Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon are both viable in this game, and that could be a unique way to pair both to get contrarian by pairing both of them. I probably wouldn't go with one or the other at captain in under those circumstances, but either way, I actually prefer Aaron Jones at his price compared to AJ Dillon at his price, just given the disparity in ownership. AJ Dillon's probably going to be the most owned player of the slate, if not Aaron Rodgers. So I like Aaron Jones on this slate. Aaron Rodgers at 10,800, a little expensive for him, but with the total being set at only 39.5, you only need really 2 touchdowns out of a quarterback to fall into the optimal lineup. And Aaron Rodgers has done that in, I think, 9 of 13 games. So it's pretty likely that Aaron Rodgers is going to throw 2 touchdowns. That would at least get him in the flex. Three probably gets him at captain. And with so many people certain that the running back situation is going to pan out in AJ Dillon's favor and be profitable because of the spread, because of the nature of the offense. Um, I like leaning into Aaron Rodgers and his pass catchers, 1, 2, maybe even 3. I probably wouldn't pair him with less than 2 if I played Rodgers at captain. I really like Lazard. I like Christian Watson, even though his ownership is going to be pretty high. And then some of these 5K darts like Tunyon and Cobb are all worth throwing in there, especially in 20 max or large field stuff. So I really like pairing Aaron Rodgers with a few pass catchers at captain just because everyone's so certain that the running back situation is going to work out a certain way. Baker Mayfield's pretty expensive for what we should expect of him. We need to contextualize that 98 of his passing yards and a touchdown came on that last drive. It's not to take away what he did. It was incredible, and he did in fact do it, so you can't just eliminate it. The point of mentioning it is just that he needed that game script. Being 7-point dogs, maybe they do throw quite a bit again, but I expect them to try to keep the game relatively close and run as much as possible. If you think it was crazy what Baker Mayfield did on 2 days before his game, it's going to be just as crazy to have a week in 2 days. That's still not any time at all for a starting quarterback to get associated with an offense. I'm sure he's been cramming. He's probably going to know a little bit more of the verbiage and such, but he's not going to have Sean McVay's whole offense down by the time this game rolls around. So don't expect Baker Mayfield to be just like full go since there's been a week and 2 days. It's probably still going to be a lot of piecing things together. So I'm not expecting a lot out of Baker Mayfield in this one. Christian Watson at 8,800 is going to be another super popular play. He's running like the hottest in the league, really, at wide receiver, but he's still only got like a 23% target share, and that's only 2% higher than Allen Lazard. So maybe I'm just a glutton for pain, but Christian Watson's going to be almost double, almost double as popular as Allen Lazard, but really has similar. Maybe the ceiling's higher. Okay, I'll give you that. Now that we're 5 weeks into this whole Christian Watson thing, the ceiling might be higher for Christian Watson, but the opportunity is very similar between the two. And I actually like playing both of them with Aaron Rodgers instead of playing like Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon together. You can just play Christian Watson, Allen Lazard. You get a similar floor out of that combination, similar ceiling, but it costs a little less and maybe slightly less ownership between those two. Cam Akers at 8,200. He only played like 40% of the snaps last week. He did get a touchdown. He had like 12, 13 opportunities, but as 7-point road favorites, not even getting 50% of the snaps, costing 8,200. I think Cam Akers is just going to be too popular to be really, really an excitable play. Probably someone I'm going to avoid in 20 max. I'll definitely have exposure in like 150 max or something like that. He's not a complete avoid in that case. Romeo Dubs makes his triumphant return, but unfortunately, DraftKings has been burned enough times by players returning from injury that um, they just said to heck with that and made him 6,800 right off the bat. So that's a little rich for their wide receiver three, who has really only had a couple decent games on the season, even though he's made some spectacular plays. So he's going to be somebody that I probably avoid entirely. Maybe he burns you with a long touchdown. We know Aaron Rodgers, quote unquote, really likes him. But yeah, 6,800 is just a little rich, especially when it's the same price as Van Jefferson, who's somebody who I would like to have some exposure to. Van Jefferson was third in targets, maybe even fourth in targets with Baker Mayfield last week, but they connected where it counted. They have some rapport apparently, and Van Jefferson is playing nearly 100% of the snaps, and I do believe he is the most talented receiver for the Rams. So we'll get into their receivers soon, but they have a lot of really, really cheap receiver options that people are going to gravitate towards because everyone's going to want to heavily stack the Packers, which we should, and then save money on your Brandon Powells of the world. So paying up for Van Jefferson, his ownership is going to be really low, and he has a pretty nice ceiling. Somebody who people aren't going to be really clicking on just due to how last week shook out. I mean, Skoranek had 8 targets, Tutu had 9 targets, Higbee, I think, had 7 targets. So if people are just looking at last week for target distribution, I think they're going to be disappointed in this one because last week was just kind of pieced together for Baker Mayfield. Tyler Higbee seems like he's returned back to full health. He hasn't really popped in the box score yet, and that's why he's somebody that I'm going to really enjoy playing, especially since he's the same price as AJ Dillon. Yeah, even a little more expensive because he was like leading the league and what was he, top 3, top 5 in targets amongst tight ends for a good portion of the year, and then he had that first injury, came back a little bit, wasn't the same, injured again, and now it seems like he's getting back to that. He played almost 100% of the snaps for the first time in a while and was targeted a decent amount. So I really do like Higbee to bounce back. But most of the reason I like playing him and even Van Jefferson is just because AJ Dillon's right there at 6,200. And like I said, everyone's going to enjoy clicking on AJ Dillon after he had a huge snap share last week, dominated the touches, etc. And AJ Dillon is a fine play in his own right. It's just he's probably not worth being one of the higher owned players of the slate. So that's enough about AJ Dillon. We'll skip over him. Fine play, but not necessarily someone that you need, as his ownership might reflect. Kyron Williams is going to be a difficult one because he played a ton of the third down snaps, but then we saw Malcolm Brown playing a lot of like the quote unquote important snaps. So it's really difficult to parse through Cam Akers, Kyron Williams, and Malcolm Brown. Probably won't have any Malcolm Brown exposure. Kyron Williams is interesting because we expect the Rams to be trailing a lot. And he didn't get a lot of work last week, even though he had a lot of snaps. So people aren't going to gravitate towards him. And I think that he is an interesting play as someone who should be more involved in the passing game. I think he only had 3 targets last week, but could definitely be higher, especially with Baker Mayfield trying to learn the offense and piece together some productivity. He would like to dump down to his back and his tight end, I'm sure, to try to get some things going. So Kyron Williams, not somebody that I'd be going to in single max or even maybe even 20 max, but someone I would definitely have exposure to in 150 max. Randall Cobb and Robert Tunyon are the same play in my mind. They're just if you want to stack 3 Green Bay receivers and you're already going Allen Lazard and Christian Watson, I wouldn't think you were crazy if you locked in Aaron Rodgers as captain. You put in Allen Lazard and Christian Watson, locked both of them in, and then just played around with your 5K and 4K receiver options for the rest of the lineup. Randall Cobb probably gets a slight nod just because Romeo Dubs is back, so people are probably going to expect that snap share to be in Dubs' favor. but I think that Randall Cobb might get one more week leading in snap share as Dubs returns from injury. So Randall Cobb is a nice little contrarian, sneaky play. Tunyon's tough. Really just a dart throw. Not much exciting to say about him. He's playing about 50% of the snaps. It's way pricier than DeGuara, who DeGuara is also playing 50% of the snaps for them at tight end. But unfortunately, he's got like 7 or 8 games of no targets. So he's going to be a tough one that we'll get to later. But he's way, way cheaper and he's playing the same amount of snaps. So it's really tough to click on Tunyon. But that's kind of why we like him, because nobody's going to want to click on him. So if you're really, really invested in Aaron Rodgers stacks and you need a 10%, 12% player to bring your cumulative ownership down, Robert Tunyon's a decent play to click on. Skoronek's probably the safest play of the Rams receivers, playing 100% of the snaps. Also, second in targets last week, one behind Tutu Atwell, who played only 60% of the snaps. So Skoranek, nothing flashy about him, but plenty safe. That leads us to Tutu led the team in targets last week. It's really difficult to tell between Tutu Atwell and Brandon Powell who would have really Tutu still would have led in snaps, but Brandon Powell was sick all the way leading up into the game last week, and we don't know how much that affected his snap share. So Tutu played the most snaps that he's played all seasons with like 65% of the snaps, and Brandon Powell only played 20 some. But we don't know how that's going to shake out going forward with Brandon Powell not sick. So that's just something to consider. I'm not off of Tutu or Brandon Powell for that matter because of that. But we might have only seen that fantastic volume for Tutu just because Brandon Powell wasn't able to take a full workload. Sammy Watkins, not somebody I'm playing. Brandon Powell, like I just mentioned, he could really have a larger role. He was a good play last showdown slate, and he's probably a good play this showdown slate too. We don't really know how that illness really affected last week, and it's really easy to just throw the whole performance out because Baker Mayfield was just ad-libbing the entire game. So it's hard to say exactly what would have happened. I think Brandon Powell's still a fine play. I think he's going to get closer to 40% of the snaps with Tutu Atwell playing about 50% of the snaps. So before we get out of here, let's build a quick Aaron Rodgers captain lineup that I was talking about. Start with Aaron Rodgers a captain. I would just lock in Lazard and Christian Watson. The ownership's not going to be too treacherous between the two. Christian Watson might be close to 50%, but Lazard's going to be like 33, 35%. So it's not too terrible of a start. Van Jefferson might be a little expensive for this one, so we're going to try to go with Skoranek, and then we're going to have to pick another 5K option to go with Aaron Rodgers. Since we've got Watson and Lazard, I'm going to go ahead and go with Tunyon. And then that leaves us with 6,800. You could do a couple things here. You could do Packers defense, would be a viable option for sure. But if you went Packers defense, you're probably going to want to switch to A.J. Dillon. So this is a good 5x1 here. You could go Aaron Rodgers at captain, Christian Watson, Allen Lazard, Ben Skoranek, A.J. Dillon, and the Packers. But then you could also go back to Tunyon. And then you have 6,800. And you're not going to want to play Van Jefferson to max out your salary probably. But Tyler Higbee's another fantastic option here. So Aaron Rodgers at captain, Christian Watson, Allen Lazard, Ben Skoranek, Robert Tunyon, and Tyler Higbee. We all know that maybe not so much this year, but last year tight ends dominated Showdown. So that's going to do it for today. That's Showdown coverage brought to you by sharpfootballanalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde. I'll catch y'all next week.